Sometimes when the wind is soft and the coffee's just right, I sit by the kitchen window and wonder how I'm still here. My name is Helen Mae Crawford, and I'm 76 years old. I live in a pale yellow cottage on the outskirts of Bentonville, Arkansas, tucked between a maple tree that refuses to die and a rose bush that won't stop blooming. My days now are slow, peaceful. I wake early. I boil water in my dented kettle. I sit at this old oak table, the one Frank built with his bare hands back in '68, and sip my tea while the sun stretches across the linoleum floor like a lazy cat. Outwardly, it's a simple life. But peace, real peace, doesn't come free. Took me half a century to get here. And the road was paved with things no child, no woman should ever endure. I wasn't born into violence. At least, not the kind people speak about. My daddy, you see, was respected. Pastor Raymond Crawford. He wore a pressed white shirt every Sunday, polished his boots till they shone like mirrors, and led the congregation at Oak Hollow Baptist for nearly 3 decades. Folks said he had a voice like honey and thunder. Sweet when he wanted, terrifying when he didn't. Mama was quiet. Lillian Jean, her name was. Delicate. Always coughing, always apologizing. Her hands were pale, soft, trembling. I don't remember her laughing much. She baked pies, apple mostly, and pressed a gentle kiss on my forehead each night, even when her lungs rattled like corn husks in the wind. We lived in a white farmhouse just off Route 16, with a red roof and a tire swing I adored. From the outside, we were a picture of Southern wholesomeness. Sunday school, potluck dinners, Daddy teaching me how to recite scripture by heart, Mama brushing my hair in long, slow strokes. But under the wallpaper, under the lace curtains and the hymns, there was rot. A rot so quiet, so hidden, that even I didn't realize it until it was far too late. This morning, as I stirred honey into my tea and looked out at the tulips Frank planted years ago, I felt something rise in me. A restlessness. A pull. I haven't told this story, not really. Not to my children. Not to the women at Wednesday cards. Not even to the Lord, though I've tried. But today something's changed. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's the ghost of Frank Delaney, my late husband, whispering through the window screen. Or maybe it's because there's a girl out there, somewhere in Montana, Georgia, Chicago, watching this, living a quiet hell, thinking no one will ever believe her. So before I begin, let me ask you a favor. From one weary soul to another. Backhand index pointing right if this story moves you. If it reminds you of something you've lived through or barely survived, please leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me the hardest thing you ever had to overcome. I promise you it's not weakness to speak. It's not shameful to remember. My peace came at a cost. And I think it's time I counted the debt. It started in 1957, the year I turned 8, though the worst didn't come until 2 years later. We were already poor, but not the kind that starves. We had corn, canned peaches, chickens in the yard. What we didn't have was warmth. Daddy ruled our home with sermons and silence. He'd preach about love on Sunday, then scream about disobedience Monday night. I learned early not to speak unless spoken to, not to look men in the eye, not to question when Mama flinched. Still, there were good days. I remember once she let me stay home from school because I had a cough. She made me grits with butter and let me sit on her lap in the porch rocker. She smelled like cinnamon and Vicks. I remember thinking, maybe she'll leave with me one day. Maybe we'll ride a train somewhere cold and start fresh. But she never did. I was 10 years old when my childhood ended. It was early fall, a sticky September night. The crickets were loud, the fan was broken, and Mama had gone to stay with her sister in Little Rock. She had a bad spell with her lungs and needed rest. Daddy came home smelling like gasoline and cheap bourbon. I thought he'd go to bed like always, but that night he walked into my room instead. And everything changed. I'll talk about that night in the next chapter. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Because sometimes speaking a truth aloud is the first step in breaking its hold. Tonight the porch swing is creaking. The sky's bruised with dusk. My tea's gone cold. But I feel something in my chest, some old buried thing starting to stir. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's fury. Maybe it's just time. So, if you're still here, still with me, thank you. Let's begin. They say a preacher carries 2 sermons, one for the pulpit and one for his own soul. I didn't understand that when I was a child. I just thought my daddy was 2 people. The one who smiled wide and firm on Sunday mornings in the church, and the one who growled low and cold behind closed doors when the congregation had gone home. Pastor Raymond Crawford wasn't just my father. He was Oak Hollow. He baptized babies, blessed marriages, buried the dead. He quoted scripture from memory and made old women cry when he sang hymns. His voice was sweet molasses in public. But in our house it turned to iron. He didn't raise his voice often. He didn't have to. He'd just look at you. That look. Like fire behind glass. And your insides would go quiet. People adored him. Mama feared him. And I lived in a constant state of contradiction. When I was small, I believed everything he told me. That God was always watching. That girls had to obey. That discipline was love. When he read me bedtime verses, I thought I was special, chosen. When he held my chin to force my eyes to meet his, I thought I was being molded. But I wasn't being molded. I was being broken. Let me be plain. My daddy was a monster dressed in starched collars and polished shoes. And the world never saw it. Because he smiled. Because he spoke the language of righteousness. Because he gave to the church and fed the poor and said ma'am to every woman in town. But behind our door he was something else entirely. My mother Lillian Jean knew. I'm certain now. But she was sickly, dependent. Her lungs had betrayed her young. She needed medicine, food, a roof. And Daddy made sure she knew where all of that came from. Don't bite the hand that feeds you, he told her once when she tried to argue. I remember it clear. She never raised her voice again after that. Some nights I would hear them. Low voices through the walls. I never caught full sentences, just fragments. She's your daughter. You're imagining things. I can't do this anymore. You'll do as I say. By morning, she'd be setting breakfast like nothing happened. Pouring grits into chipped bowls, her eyes vacant, her hands trembling just slightly. Mama never bruised. Not on the outside. But her soul? Her soul was black and blue. The thing about men like my father is they don't just control through fists. They use fear. Silence. The weight of their presence in a room. They take the truth and twist it until you doubt your own memory. When I was 9, I asked Mama if we could move in with Aunt Clara in Little Rock. Just for a while, I said. Just the two of us. She looked at me for a long time. Too long. Then said softly, he wouldn't let us go. And anyway, where would we get money for your medicine? I didn't have any medicine. That was the day I stopped asking for help. Let me tell you something that still haunts me. One Sunday, Daddy preached on the sins of Lot's daughters. I was sitting in the front pew, knees together, hands folded. He looked directly at me when he said, even blood can be corrupted by temptation. The congregation nodded solemnly. One woman shouted, Amen. I was 10. I didn't understand everything he meant back then. But I knew he was blaming me. You see, that's how these men survive. They make you think it's your fault. That you wanted it. That you're wicked. That you're the problem. It took me decades to untangle that lie from my bones. Decades. Looking back now, I know what he really feared. He feared people finding out. He feared losing the pulpit. He feared a world where women didn't stay quiet. So he did what many predators do. He isolated us. Mama was too sick to go out much. I wasn't allowed to sleep over at friends' houses. When the school asked why I missed so many days, he said I was delicate and too sensitive. People believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was the preacher. There's a photograph from that year. I'm standing beside him after Easter service, wearing a pale green dress Mama sewed herself. He's got one hand on my shoulder and the other holding a Bible. People say I look like a doll in that picture. I think I look like a hostage. Years later, someone from Oak Hollow found me and mailed me that photo, asking if I remembered the day. Oh, I remembered. That was the day he made me read aloud from Proverbs. The part about obeying your father and honoring your mother. My voice shook the whole time. He told the church it was because I was shy. No one noticed the bruises under my sleeves. No one noticed the way I flinched when he touched my hair. Or maybe they noticed and turned away. That's the thing that hurts the most sometimes, not just the abuse itself but the silence around it. The people who suspect and say nothing. The friends who wonder and do nothing. The churchgoers who sense something's wrong and pray it isn't their place to interfere. Well, it is your place. If you're reading this, watching this, Remembering someone you once worried about, call them. Check on them. Be that person who didn't look away. Because I can tell you this much. No 10-year-old girl should feel safer in a locked closet than in her own bed. And no father should be able to preach about heaven while building hell in his daughter's room. It was a Tuesday night. I remember that, not because anything particular ever happened on Tuesdays, but because my mama had gone to Little Rock for another treatment, and I was the only one left in the house with him. The crickets were loud. The air was thick and wet. That sticky kind of Arkansas heat that clings to your skin like shame. I was 10. And that night something in me died. He came in after dark. The floorboards creaked under his boots' slow methodical steps down the hallway. I'd left the door cracked like Mama always did. I don't know if it was for airflow or to prove we had nothing to hide. That night I wished I had nailed the damn thing shut. He didn't knock. Just pushed it open like it was his birthright. I remember the smell first, gasoline, bourbon, sweat. Then the shadow over my bed. He sat down on the edge, and the mattress dipped beneath his weight. "Don't be scared," he said. My hands clenched around the edge of the sheet so tight my knuckles went white. My legs stiffened. My throat closed. "You're growing up," he continued. "Almost a woman." I don't remember the rest in clear detail. Trauma is funny like that, it doesn't preserve everything. Just shards. Impressions. Sounds. Smells. A coldness in your belly. A sense that the world has cracked open, and you're falling into a place with no floor. I do remember the ceiling. I stared at it while it happened. It had a crack in it that looked like a crooked lightning bolt. I counted the seconds between his breaths. I tried to disappear. Afterward, I curled into myself like a dead leaf. He told me not to tell Mama. Said it was between us. That she'd be too sick to handle it. That she'd blame me. And part of me believed him. That's how shame works. It grows in silence. It thrives in the dark. That night, and so many nights after, I would lie still long after he left the room. Too afraid to cry, too numb to scream. I'd bury my face in the pillow, praying the Lord would take me in my sleep. But the Lord didn't. So I began to disappear in other ways. At school, I sat in the back row and stopped raising my hand. I avoided other kids. I flinched when the teacher praised me for reading well because my daddy also praised me when I recited scripture. And that had never led to anything good. I stopped talking much. Became the girl who stared out the window, who didn't join in games at recess, who never had friends over. I learned how to fade. And the adults? They noticed something was wrong. Of course they did. But they called it moodiness. Or growing pains. Or she's just quiet, bless her heart. One time my 4th grade teacher, Miss Evers, took me aside after class. She knelt beside my desk, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and asked, "Honey, is everything all right at home?" I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to throw myself into her arms and sob until I collapsed. But all I could manage was, "Yes, ma'am." She smiled, patted my hand, and let me go. I cried that night. Not because she didn't do more, but because I didn't know how to ask. Later that same year I tried to tell Mama. It was one of her good days. She was up and moving, humming while folding laundry. I stood in the hallway, knees knocking together, heart hammering like a trapped bird. I opened my mouth. "Mama, Daddy does things to me." She slapped me before the words finished leaving my mouth. A hard open palm slap across the face. "Don't you ever speak like that again," she hissed. "Do you want to kill me? Do you want people to think my husband is a monster? What kind of girl says such a thing about her own father?" I touched my cheek and nodded. "I'm sorry." I never said another word to her about it. Not when it happened again the next week. Not when I started bleeding at 11 and didn't tell her. Not even when she coughed blood into the sink and I thought she might die and I'd be left alone with him forever. I just stayed silent. Because silence had become my only shield. There's something I need people to understand, especially those who ask, "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" Or "Why didn't you fight back?" Because we don't fight back when we're 10. We survive. We endure. We find little cracks in the day to breathe through. Sometimes I'd hide in the cornfield out back. I'd lie flat between the stalks, eyes closed, trying to imagine what life felt like for kids in cities. Or in books. I used to read Little Women under the covers at night with a flashlight. I wanted to be Jo March so badly, fierce, smart, free. But I wasn't Jo. I was just Helen. The preacher's daughter. The girl with too quiet eyes and too many secrets. By the time I was 11, I could clean the house top to bottom, cook supper, and memorize an entire sermon's worth of verses. I could also pretend I was fine so convincingly I fooled myself some days. I lost my childhood in pieces, not all at once. A puzzle slowly unassembled, until the only thing left was a hollow space where joy used to live. They say a mother's love is a shelter, a place you crawl into when the storms come and the world grows too loud. But what happens when your shelter refuses to see the fire? What happens when the person who's supposed to protect you slaps you for asking to be saved? I don't blame my mama. Not anymore. But it took me most of a lifetime to get there. I was 11 the first and only time I ever tried to tell her the truth. I'd been carrying it in my chest for a year, heavy and burning like coal. I'd practiced it in whispers, under my breath while washing dishes, into the wind when I walked to school, even once in front of the bathroom mirror. Mama, he's doing things to me. Mama, he comes into my room. Mama, im skared. That morning she was folding laundry. She had one of her better spells. Her cough hadn't rattled her lungs since Friday, and the color was back in her cheeks. The sun poured through the window like hope. I remember thinking, this is the moment. I stepped into the room slowly, my hands clasped in front of me like I was praying. Mama, I said. She didn't look up. Yes, baby. Daddy. He's doing something to me. That was all I got out. She dropped the pillowcase she was folding, turned and struck me across the face. It wasn't a gentle slap. It was fast, hard, and full of something I didn't recognize at the time, terror. Her face twisted, not in anger exactly but in panic. Don't ever say such a thing again, she hissed. You want people to think I raised a filthy liar? You want the whole county to know that Peter Crawford's daughter is spreading poison about her own daddy. I stood there stunned, one cheek burning. But Mama, do you want to kill me? She said, louder now, voice trembling. Do you want to bring shame on this house? On your brothers? On the Lord's name? That shut me up. Because what I heard wasn't just her voice, it was his. Coming out of her mouth. Echoing in the corners of the room. Shame. Guilt. The devil's lies. It was then I understood the full shape of my prison. It wasn't just my daddy. It was this. The silence. The complicity. The fear that choked this house like creeping vines. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. Hands in my lap, the slap still tingling on my skin. I stared at the curtain. The same faded pink one that failed to protect me every night. I knew then I'd never try to tell her again. She was drowning in her own way. And there was no lifeboat big enough for both of us. From that day on, Mama and I danced the saddest waltz. She pretended nothing was wrong. I pretended to believe her. She cooked dinner in silence. I cleaned the dishes without asking. We said our goodnights with hollow smiles. We were two ghosts haunting the same house. And Daddy? He sensed it. He knew he'd won. That's what predators crave most, control. Not just of the body but of the truth. The narrative. And when he saw Mama slap me, when he heard me stay silent afterward, he knew I was trapped. Alone. After that, he grew bolder. He'd linger longer at my doorway. His touches became less cautious. And worst of all, he started testing my fear in daylight. Not just at night, not just in secret. Once I was washing the floor near the porch, and he walked by, brushing his hand along the back of my neck. You're learning to be obedient, he said. That pleases the Lord. I wanted to vomit. Another time, in front of Mama, he patted my shoulder at dinner and said, Our girl's becoming a fine young woman, isn't she? Mama nodded, eyes on her plate. She didn't see how my fork trembled. Silence doesn't protect children. It preserves monsters. I began to count down the days and seasons. When the dogwoods bloom, maybe I'll be brave enough. When the leaves turn red, maybe I'll run. When the first frost comes, maybe I'll disappear. But I was 11. And children don't run. They endure. They wait. I started escaping in small ways. I'd lose myself in books, reading until my eyes burned. I stopped brushing my hair. I started skipping meals. Part of me hoped someone would notice. A teacher. A neighbor. Anyone. But no one did. I was shy. Well behaved. Such a sweet girl. And that's the great irony, isn't it? When you're quiet, polite, invisible, that's when you're most in danger. Because people don't worry about invisible girls. They only worry about the ones who scream. I kept my eyes down, my voice low, my world small. And inside I screamed every day. Now, decades later, I know what Mama felt that morning she hit me. She felt powerless. She knew what I was saying was true. She had likely known for a long time. Maybe she had seen it in his eyes. Maybe she had suffered her own invisible terrors. But what scared her most wasn't the evil. It was what would happen if that evil was spoken out loud. It's easier sometimes to bury truth than to face it. But that burial costs lives. Childhoods. Futures. I forgave her. But I will never say she wasn't responsible. We were both victims. But I was also her daughter. And she should have chosen me. My mother died on a Thursday morning. The air smelled like wood smoke and turning leaves. The doctor said it was her lungs. They'd finally given out after years of coughing, wheezing, and swallowing spoonfuls of bitter syrup that never did any good. When the town nurse came by to confirm, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "At least she's at peace now, baby." Peace. That word meant nothing to me then. I was 14. And with my mother gone, I no longer had a shield, even if it was a thin and fraying one. She had been a poor protector, yes. But she was still a wall between me and the devil in our home. A thin curtain maybe like the one that hung around my bed, but even a curtain can block a little sunlight. Or give the illusion of privacy, the illusion that someone else might hear if you screamed. Now she was gone, and I was truly alone. At her funeral people cried. They hugged Daddy, patted his back, called him strong, faithful, God-fearing. They brought casseroles and pies and shook their heads with pity. How's he going to raise a teenage girl by himself? He's got the Lord. And Helen's a good girl. Real quiet. She won't cause trouble. I stood beside him as he pretended to grieve. His hand was firm on my shoulder. Not comforting. Possessive. His grip told me without words, "You are mine now." Entirely. And it was true. Because once Mama was buried, something changed. He didn't hide it anymore. Not like before. It was no longer limited to the quiet hours of the night. Now he'd call me into the pantry while cooking, or brush against me in the hallway, and whisper things that made bile rise in my throat. He was no longer cautious. There was no one left to perform for. And when I resisted, when I cried, when I tried to pull away, he would growl low in my ear. "Do you want me to hurt your baby brothers instead? You think you're saving yourself, girl? You think they're safe?" That shut me down. I had 2 younger brothers then, James and Patrick, and a baby sister, Emily, just 5 years old with curls like spun honey, and a voice that still believed in fairy tales. I became compliant. Not because I gave in, but because I made a decision. If the only way to protect them was to keep letting it happen to me, then so be it. People think bravery is loud. Screaming. Running. Fighting back. But sometimes bravery is doing the unthinkable to protect someone smaller than you. Sometimes bravery looks like surrender. That year I lost weight. My skin turned sallow. The teachers noticed. One even pulled me aside and asked if things were okay at home. I looked her in the eye and said, "Yes, ma'am." Because by then I knew what happened when you told the truth. They didn't believe you. Or worse, they told your father. And then things got so much worse. I began to imagine running away. But where would I go? I had no relatives. No friends. No money. And the people in our town? They adored my father, Pastor Crawford, raising 4 kids alone after the tragedy. A hero. A man of God. There was no safe place. No net waiting to catch me. Until there was. His name was Frank. But I'll get to him in time. Because before he showed up, before I even imagined that someone might look at me and not see something broken, I came close to ending it all. I was 16 when I climbed the old oak tree behind the barn. The same one Daddy used to hang the tire swing for us. The same one Mama had tied red ribbons on during Christmas. I carried a rope I'd found in the shed. I'd been practicing the knot for weeks. No one noticed. I picked a branch I thought would hold me. And as I stood there on the edge of that thick bark trying to quiet the terror in my chest, I heard her. Emily. Calling for me from the kitchen window. "Lenny. Lenny. Can you help me find my doll?" Her voice was high, innocent. She couldn't see me. But she was looking for me, needing me, and something in me cracked open like glass under pressure. I dropped the rope. I climbed down, and I sobbed, not just from despair but from rage. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live, but I didn't know how. That night, lying in my bed, I made a new kind of decision. If I couldn't escape alone, then I'd wait for a chance. Not just to run, but to take all of us with me. My brothers, my sister, all of us, out. That hope, fragile and flickering as it was, became the thing that kept me going. Because as cruel as he was, my father couldn't control the future. And somewhere out there, beyond the cornfields and the gossip and the sermons, was a life waiting to begin. A life I hadn't even dared to imagine yet. But soon I would. Because soon I'd meet Frank Delaney. And the world would shift. I first saw him on a muggy Sunday afternoon, standing at the market stall beside mine with dust on his boots and a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. He bought 5 pieces of cornbread. Didn't even haggle. "Miss," he said, tipping his cap, "that cornbread looks mighty fine. Let me have 5. I handed them over without looking him in the eye. Not because I was shy, but because I'd been taught not to look at men, especially not young, strong ones with kind voices and soft eyes. Daddy always said, "Your eyes invite trouble, Helen." And I believed him. But this man, Frank Delaney, didn't seem like trouble. He seemed patient, gentle, curious. Still I didn't speak. Just nodded, took his coins, looked at the ground. The market was the only place Daddy allowed me to go alone, every Sunday after church. I'd sell cornbread, sweet pickles, sometimes hand-stitched doilies. People said I had gifted hands. He liked that I brought home cash. Said it made me useful. He never suspected it would be the very place where I'd begin to imagine my escape. Frank started showing up every week. He always bought 5 pieces. Always smiled. Always lingered. Sometimes he'd tell me stories. About the big city, St. Louis, where he'd grown up. About his job building the new road connecting our town to the highway. About how he hoped one day to open his own auto repair shop. "I like fixing broken things," he said once as he bit into my cornbread. "Makes me feel like something still works in this world." I gave a nervous half-smile. Didn't say much. But I started listening. Really listening. I'd never heard a man talk like that. Not about dreams. Or about wanting to help things run again. Most men I knew talked about control. Obedience. Sin. Frank talked about cinnamon grease and the sound a Ford makes when it's running right. Little by little, he became the brightest part of my week. He never asked personal questions. Never touched me. Never leaned in too close. Just stood a few feet away and talked like he had all the time in the world. And for the first time in my life I wanted time. I started dressing different. Not fancy, just cleaner. I'd wear a blue ribbon in my hair. Press the creases in my skirt. Not for him exactly, but for the girl I used to be. The one who had disappeared somewhere between the tire swing and the nightmares. One Sunday he asked, "Do you always wear long sleeves even in this heat?" I lowered my eyes. The bruises on my arms still hadn't faded. "I burn easy," I lied. He didn't push. Just nodded and said, "I brought you something." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small bottle of arnica balm. "Helps bruises heal faster," he said simply. I stared at the bottle like it was gold. How had he known? Was it that obvious? After 2 months of these quiet Sundays, he invited me to see the road he was working on. "Just a walk," he said. "It's real pretty up there. Lots of shade. Birds." I panicked. "No," I said quickly. "I can't. My father." "Your father doesn't need to know." He wasn't being reckless. He was offering me a choice. And for once I took it. I told Daddy I'd be going to the pond to fetch water. That it might take a while. I don't know why he believed me that day. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he thought I had already been broken enough not to risk anything. But he was wrong. Frank and I walked for an hour. The dirt road was still fresh, soft under our feet. We talked about books. He told me his mama used to read him Treasure Island. I told him I liked Little Women. He said I reminded him of Joe March. "No one's ever said that to me before," I whispered. "Well," he said, smiling, "they should have." Halfway down the road he stopped walking. Looked at me. Helen, he said. Something wrong's happening at your house, isn't it? I froze. Everything in me screamed to lie, to say no, to run. But there was something in his voice. A steadiness. A warmth. And for the first time in 6 years I told the truth. My father, I whispered. He since I was 10. The rest came out in gasps. Shaking. Sobbing. I told him everything. How it started. How no one believed me. How he threatened my siblings. How I was planning to kill myself before Emily called me down from the tree. Frank didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. When I finished, he stepped closer. Gently, like approaching a wounded bird. And he wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't romantic. It was protective. It was the first hug I'd had in years that didn't make my skin crawl. I'm going to get you out of there, Helen, he said. I promise. No one's going to hurt you anymore. I didn't believe him. Not yet. But his voice wrapped around me like a blanket. And for the first time, the idea of being saved didn't feel like a fairy tale. Felt like a plan. I first saw him on a muggy Sunday afternoon, standing at the market stall beside mine with dust on his boots and a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. He bought 5 pieces of cornbread. Didn't even haggle. Miss, he said, tipping his cap, that cornbread looks mighty fine. Let me have 5. I handed them over without looking him in the eye. Not because I was shy, but because I'd been taught not to look at men, especially not young, strong ones with kind voices and soft eyes. Daddy always said, your eyes invite trouble, Helen. And I believed him. But this man, Frank Delaney, didn't seem like trouble. He seemed patient, gentle, curious. Still I didn't speak. Just nodded. Took his coins. Looked at the ground. The market was the only place Daddy allowed me to go alone. Every Sunday after church. I'd sell cornbread, sweet pickles, sometimes hand-stitched doilies. People said I had gifted hands. He liked that I brought home cash. Said it made me useful. He never suspected it would be the very place where I'd begin to imagine my escape. Frank started showing up every week. He always bought 5 pieces. Always smiled. Always lingered. Sometimes he'd tell me stories. About the big city, St. Louis, where he'd grown up. About his job building the new road connecting our town to the highway. About how he hoped one day to open his own auto repair shop. I like fixing broken things, he said once as he bit into my cornbread. Makes me feel like something still works in this world. I gave a nervous half-smile. Didn't say much. But I started listening. Really listening. I'd never heard a man talk like that. Not about dreams. Or about wanting to help things run again. Most men I knew talked about control. Obedience. Sin. Frank talked about cinnamon grease and the sound a Ford makes when it's running right. Little by little, he became the brightest part of my week. He never asked personal questions. Never touched me. Never leaned in too close. Just stood a few feet away and talked like he had all the time in the world. And for the first time in my life I wanted time. I started dressing different. Not fancy, just cleaner. I'd wear a blue ribbon in my hair. Press the creases in my skirt. Not for him exactly, but for the girl I used to be. The one who had disappeared somewhere between the tire swing and the nightmares. One Sunday he asked, do you always wear long sleeves even in this heat? I lowered my eyes. The bruises on my arms still hadn't faded. I burn easy, I lied. He didn't push. Just nodded and said, I brought you something. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small bottle of arnica balm. Helps bruises heal faster, he said simply. I stared at the bottle like it was gold. How had he known? Was it that obvious? After 2 months of these quiet Sundays, he invited me to see the road he was working on. Just a walk, he said. It's real pretty up there. Lots of shade. Birds. I panicked. No, I said quickly. I can't. My father. Your father doesn't need to know. He wasn't being reckless. He was offering me a choice. And for once I took it. I told Daddy I'd be going to the pond to fetch water. That it might take a while. I don't know why he believed me that day. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he thought I had already been broken enough not to risk anything. But he was wrong. Frank and I walked for an hour. The dirt road was still fresh, soft under our feet. We talked about books. He told me his mama used to read him Treasure Island. I told him I liked Little Women. He said I reminded him of Joe March. No one's ever said that to me before, I whispered. Well, he said, smiling, they should have. Halfway down the road he stopped walking. Looked at me. Helen, he said. Something wrong's happening at your house, isn't it? I froze. Everything in me screamed to lie. To say no. To run. But there was something in his voice. A steadiness. A warmth. And for the first time in 6 years I told the truth. My father, I whispered. He since I was 10. The rest came out in gasps. Shaking. Sobbing. I told him everything. How it started. How no one believed me. How he threatened my siblings. How I was planning to kill myself before Emily called me down from the tree. Frank didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. When I finished, he stepped closer. Gently, like approaching a wounded bird. And he wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't romantic. It was protective. It was the first hug I'd had in years that didn't make my skin crawl. I'm going to get you out of there, Helen, he said. I promise. No one's going to hurt you anymore. I didn't believe him. Not yet. But his voice wrapped around me like a blanket. And for the first time, the idea of being saved didn't feel like a fairy tale. Felt like a plan. They say the opposite of fear is courage. But sometimes it's gentleness. Real gentleness, the kind that holds space for your shaking hands, your silence, your nightmares. The kind that waits not for the storm to pass, but to hold you through it. That was Frank. He didn't rescue me just once. He rescued me every day. When we first moved in with his Aunt Dolores in Little Rock, life was quiet, safe, predictable, and terrifying in its own new way. I had never known peace before, so I didn't trust it. I didn't know how to sit still without listening for footsteps. I didn't know how to sleep without a blanket tucked under the door. Frank understood this. He didn't ask questions when I double-checked the locks 3 times every night. Didn't comment when I slept with a knife under my pillow for the first month. He simply existed beside me, firm, unshaken. After 2 weeks, he said, "Let's get married." Not as a formality. Not as a fantasy. As a shield. "I want to give you my name," he said, "because it means you're not his anymore. You're yours. And if you'll let me, I'll help you carry this burden." I cried when he said that. Not because I felt overwhelmed, but because no one had ever wanted to share the weight before. My pain had always been something I carried alone, heavy secret mine. We married on a chilly Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled like coffee and old wood. No flowers. No family except my siblings and Aunt Dolores. Just a simple ceremony and a kiss so soft it felt like prayer. Frank found work quickly. At a local auto shop just like he dreamed. I stayed home with the kids. I cooked. I cleaned. I walked Emily to school. Felt domestic, even ordinary. But inside me, something extraordinary was beginning. Healing. It wasn't a straight line. The first time Frank touched my back in the kitchen, I jumped. The first time he said, "You're beautiful," I burst into tears. He never corrected me. Never made me feel silly for carrying all that trauma like a second skin. Instead, he sat beside me. Listened when I spoke. And when I couldn't speak, he sat through the silence like it was music. The first time we were intimate, months after our wedding, I trembled the entire time. He stopped. Asked, "Do you feel safe right now?" I didn't answer at first. But then I realized I did. Not just safe from harm. Safe to feel. That night marked a turning point. It was the first time I understood what love without fear looked like. It didn't demand. It didn't invade. It waited. It respected. Frank taught me that love could be strong and soft in the same breath. Together we built a home from scratch. After a year, we moved out of Dolores's house and rented a small place near the park. Frank saved up every dime to buy tools. I started a side business sewing clothes for neighborhood women. We'd tuck the kids into bed and dream together about a house with a porch swing. And then in 1972, 2 years after our escape, our first child was born. We named him Benjamin. The labor was long and terrifying. I'd been so afraid, terrified of hospitals, of pain, of being touched in the most vulnerable way. But the midwife, Miss Charlotte, understood. I didn't have to tell her my story. Maybe she saw it in my eyes. She asked for permission before every exam. Spoke in a whisper. Held my hand when I screamed. And when they placed that warm, squirming boy in my arms, when I saw his tiny fists and the soft curve of his lips, I felt something crack open in me. Not a wound. A window. "Look, Frank," I whispered. "He has your eyes." Frank cried. I did too. That moment rewrote something deep inside me. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a mother. A protector. A builder of something new. We went on to have 2 more children, Grace in 1975 and Thomas in 1980. Each one brought more healing. Each one gave me new purpose. And though I never stopped having flashbacks, never stopped locking the doors twice at night, those moments became fewer, softer. The house we eventually bought was small. Just 3 bedrooms, a patchy lawn, and a kitchen with cracked linoleum. But to me it was a castle. Because in that house no one screamed. No one hit. No one touched without consent. We made rules. We listen when someone says no. We say sorry like we mean it. We don't keep secrets that hurt. It wasn't perfect. No family ever is. But it was real. Frank was a different kind of father than the one I had. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't believe in teaching with fear. "Those who hit to educate," he said once, "only teach their children that love hurts." He tickled instead of slapped. He built forts instead of fences. He taught our kids how to fix bicycles, how to change tires, how to speak with kindness. And I taught them how to sew, how to say no, how to trust themselves. My siblings thrived too. James became a teacher. Patrick opened a hardware store. Emily, the baby I protected all those years, grew up to be a social worker. The first in our family to go to college. At her graduation, she hugged me and whispered, "I always knew you saved me." I held her tighter than I ever had. Because by then I understood something important. Love isn't a grand gesture. It's the daily decision to show up, to choose kindness, to hold space, to stay. And Frank? He never left. Not once. By the time Frank turned 74, we had grown into that quiet kind of love, the kind where you don't need to say much. Where a glance across the dinner table says everything. Where you still cut his toast in triangles because that's how he likes it. And he still rubs your feet after church even when his own back is killing him. We were planning a little anniversary barbecue, just family, a few neighbors. I'd made his favorite, cornbread with honey butter. He kissed me that morning like always. Told me he had to pick up a part for the old Ford he'd been restoring, and that he'd be back before lunch. He never made it home. The accident was brutal. A delivery truck's brakes failed on a downhill stretch, crashing into 4 cars. Frank's was one of them. I remember the voice on the phone, calm, emotionless, surgical. "Are you the wife of Mr. Frank Delaney?" "Yes. There's been an accident. You should come immediately." I didn't cry at first. Didn't scream. Didn't even breathe properly. I just moved. Like a machine. When I got to the hospital, our son Benjamin was already there. The doctors took us into a small room with gray walls and chairs no one wanted to sit in. They used words like massive trauma, no brain activity, irreversible. But I only remember one. Goodbye. I held his hand in the ICU. It was still warm. Still strong. I whispered every memory I could into his ear. And at 8:43 p.m. his heart stopped. The man who had saved me, who had given me safety, softness, love, was gone. In the days that followed, I moved like a ghost again. Like I had after Mama's funeral. Only this time it wasn't fear that haunted me. It was absence. His toothbrush in the cup. His hat on the rack. The smell of his aftershave on the pillow. It all said, he was here. But it also said, he's never coming back. And then just when I thought the worst had passed, the past came knocking. It started with a phone call late one night. A number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. But something in me said, pick it up. Is this Helen Crawford Delaney? My blood ran cold. No one had used all 3 of my names in decades. This is Tony, your father's second cousin. I know it's been years, but I thought you should know. Your Uncle Gerald passed away yesterday. The wake is tomorrow in Shelbyville. Uncle Gerald. A name I hadn't heard in 40 years. Why would I care? Still, I said, thank you for letting me know. Then he added casually, your cousin Adelmo will be there. And suddenly my world tilted. Adelmo.
Gérald Desson.
The one who had my father's eyes. His jaw. His smirk. The one who used to watch me a little too long at family reunions. Who once whispered when I was 13, "Your daddy says you're his favorite." I hadn't thought of him in decades. Didn't want to. But something about that name, that call, it stuck. My children told me not to go. "Mom, why reopen old wounds? You barely knew him." But this wasn't about Uncle Gerald. It was about the ghosts. It was about proving to myself that the place I ran from no longer had power over me. So I went. I took a bus back to the county I'd fled at 16. Back to the cornfields. The gas stations. The dusty roads. When I stepped onto that land, it all came flooding back. The store where Daddy bought moonshine. The pond where Frank and I had made our plan. The church where people sang about salvation and ignored the bruises on my arms. The wake was crowded. Relatives I didn't recognize. Faces that had aged like mine. Whispers. "It's her. The one who ran off with that city boy." And then I saw him. Adelmo. Older now, but unmistakable. He looked at me across the room, and in his eyes I saw it. That same hunger. That same threat. He walked over, too close, too calm. "Gertrude," he said, using my birth name. "You've aged well. I go by Helen now." "Some things never change," he smiled. "You still smell like fear." My stomach twisted. I heard about Frank. Tragic, really. You must feel very unprotected these days. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. A reminder that monsters don't always die when the body does. Sometimes they pass the torch. And my father, he had groomed Adelmo to be his heir. After the wake, I returned to Little Rock feeling like I'd walked barefoot across shattered glass. Every step away from Shelbyville should have brought relief, but instead it brought dread. Because Adelmo hadn't just spoken threats. He had studied me. Stalked me. He knew about Frank. About where I lived. Even about my recent heart surgery. I started locking every window twice. Kept a hammer near the door. Slept with my phone under the pillow. I didn't tell my kids, not yet. I didn't want to drag them into a past I worked so hard to bury. But the past wasn't done with me. A week later, my eldest son Benjamin came over, carrying an envelope. "Mom," he said, voice tight. "We were going through Dad's papers. We found this." He handed me a yellowed envelope. No return address. Inside was a letter. Written in my father's handwriting. It was addressed to Frank. Dated just 3 months before his death. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a manifesto. A curse. A final act of control from the grave. "You think you won, Frank. That you took what was mine. But mark my words, when you die, so will her protection. And then she'll be his. As it was meant to be. My nephew knows what to do. He's been waiting." My stomach twisted. Adelmo hadn't shown up by accident. He'd been sent. Trained. Conditioned. Molded into the next abuser. Like a relay race of evil, and I was still the finish line. I looked at Benjamin. He saw the fear in my eyes. "Has he contacted you?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "He came to the wake. And he said things." My son's jaw clenched. I saw Frank in that look, the silent, protective fury. "You're not handling this alone," he said. "I'll talk to Grace and Thomas. We'll make a plan." But I shook my head. "No. You don't understand. This fight is mine. I can't let it consume you too. Mom, we're already part of it. That man threatened you. That makes it my business." I wanted to protest. But deep down I knew he was right. And yet, nothing prepared me for what came next. It was a Monday morning. I was supposed to visit Frank's grave as I did every week. But that day I had a checkup at the clinic instead. My heart was still recovering from surgery. I told Benjamin I'd go later. Around noon there was a knock on my door. 2 men. One in uniform. "Mrs. Delaney?" the officer asked. "We need to speak with you about an incident this morning." My hands turned cold. "What happened?" "There was an altercation at the cemetery," he said. "A man was found dead near your husband's plot." Dead. I sat down, knees trembling. "His name?" "Adelmo Pereira." Witnesses saw him vandalizing Frank's grave. They said a man confronted him. They struggled. Adelmo fell backward, hit his head on a stone and died instantly. The police believed it was the cemetery caretaker who had stepped in. But I knew better. That evening Benjamin came over quiet, steady. We sat in silence for a long time before I said it. It was you, wasn't it? He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. But in his eyes I saw everything. He'd been there. He'd followed me to the wake. Had seen the danger. Had read the letter and realized what we were truly up against. And he'd gone to the cemetery, not knowing what would happen, but knowing he had to be there. I couldn't let him get to you, Mom, he said finally. Not after everything. Not after what Dad did to keep you safe. I looked at my son. My protector. The child I once cradled in a hospital room, now grown into the man who had done what I couldn't, put an end to the chain. I never wanted this for you, I whispered. This legacy. This weight. I didn't choose it, he said. But I won't let it continue. We never spoke of it again. The police ruled it an accident. No charges.
No suspicion.
But in that moment, something deeper shifted. Because for so long I believed the chain of abuse was unbreakable. That men like my father created shadows that would follow generations. But Benjamin proved something I never dared to hope. That we could raise a different kind of man. Not one who turned away. Not one who abused his strength. But one who used it to protect, not to control. He didn't become his grandfather. He became his father's son. And in doing so, he became the blade that cut the cord. The cycle was broken. For good. 3 days after Adelmo's death, I received one last visitor. She arrived on a Thursday morning, quiet as snowfall, wearing a thrifted coat and a look of unbearable apology. She was in her early 30s. Tall. Thin. Dark ponytail. The kind of face you recognize but can't quite place. She stood on my porch like someone who'd been driving for hours without turning the radio on. Mrs. Delaney? She asked, her voice shaking. I'm Claire. Clary Pereira. My breath caught. Adelmo's daughter. For a second I froze. A part of me, older, afraid, wanted to slam the door. But something else held me there. Something newer. Wiser. She looked nothing like her father. Or maybe it was just the expression on her face, one he never wore. Sorrow. Shame. Grace. I came to ask for your forgiveness, she said. I let her in. We sat in the living room, the walls humming with silence. Claire told me everything. How she'd grown up with a man obsessed. A man who spoke of me not as a person but as a wound. A score. A legacy he'd been tasked with fulfilling. She told me about the letters he'd kept. Letters written by my father to Adelmo, instructing him, twisting him, grooming him. One day she'll be alone. The old man will die. And then she'll be yours. She was mine first. You must finish what I couldn't. Those letters were poison. And Adelmo drank deeply. But Claire didn't. She told me she began questioning him in her teens. That she'd seen the holes in his stories. That she'd begged him to let go of the past, to stop chasing ghosts. He said you owed him, she whispered. That he was honoring your father's last wish. Her eyes filled with tears. When he found out your husband had passed, something in him changed. Like he had permission now. I stared at the woman in front of me. This wasn't the enemy. This was another daughter caught in the wreckage. I tried to stop him, Claire said. The day he went to the cemetery. I knew. I tried to take the car keys. I threatened to call the police. He locked me in the house. And then through tears she added. I saw what happened. My heart stopped. She had been there. At Frank's grave. Hiding behind trees. Watching her father confront my son. I saw your boy, she said softly. I saw what he did. I know it wasn't murder. It was protection. I said nothing. The weight of her words sank into the walls. I haven't told anyone, she continued. And I won't. Your son saved you. And maybe saved my daughter too. That's when I noticed the small hand peeking out from behind Claire's coat. A little girl. 5 years old. Eyes wide, innocent. No fear.
Nos cham.
I named her Hope, Claire said. And I wept. Because somehow, through all the darkness, that name felt like the most radical thing in the world. Hope. Claire reached into her bag and handed me a thick envelope. The original letters from my father to Adelmo. I don't want them, she said. Do whatever you think is right. That night I built a small fire in our backyard.
No ceremony.
No words. One by one I fed the letters to the flames. I watched the words that had cursed me for decades turn to ash. I burned not just paper but lineage. I burned silence. Control.
Generaste el sin.
And when the fire died down, I felt something inside me settle for the first time in 76 years. Stillness. It was over. Truly over. These days my house is filled with light. My grandchildren play on the same floor I once walked barefoot in terror. They slam screen doors, chase bubbles, steal cookies before dinner. They are loud, joyful, unruly. Safe. I tell them stories now. Not all of them, but enough to teach them how to listen, how to speak, how to recognize what love should feel like. Claire and I meet sometimes. In parks. Over tea. We let her daughter play with my grandkids. The children don't know their bloodlines were once poisoned. They just laugh. Share crayons. Fight over sidewalk chalk. And that is enough. That is healing. People ask me why I finally told this story. Why now? Because somewhere out there, a girl is counting ceiling cracks at night. Because a mother is ignoring her daughter's bruises. Because someone is wondering if they can survive what no one else believes. Yes, you can. I did. And I am not special. I am not brave every day. But I chose to speak. I chose to break the chain. And you can too. This story didn't begin with me. But it ended with me. The curse is burned. The silence is broken. And love, real, patient, stubborn love is what remains. Thank you for listening. From my heart to yours, Helen May Crawford. Bentonville, Arkansas. 76 years old. Still healing. Still here.